so our topic is what you expect is what you get. And it deals with self-fulfilling prophecy and how teachers' expectancies change how students do in school. And this topic's important because all students are affected by how their teachers think of them and how bright or dull they seem to be IQ-wise. And then we also need to be aware that our expectations can change our experiments and how we perceive events. So our research question is, are students affected by teacher expectancies? And the answer through research is yes, they are, because teachers treat their students differently based upon IQ scores that they get as early as first grade. And if they appear to be more gifted, teachers gravitate towards those kids and give them extra attention, and then they do better in school. So beforehand, there were a couple of experiments that dealt with this idea. One of them was by Wilhelm von Osten, and his horse, Clever Hans, was trained to answer math problems. So if he was given a math problem, he would stomp out with his hoof how many numbers the answer to the question. And people were really surprised by this, and they didn't understand how a horse could comprehend that. But in actuality, von Osten only taught him to see subtle movements in the observer. So if the observer moved his head and looked at the horse towards the last number to the answer, then he knew to stop, but he didn't actually know how to do any math at all. And then this brought up the idea of experimenter expectancy effect, which means that the observer to the experiment running the experiment can affect actually what happens in the experiment. And then the next experiment after that would be Robert Rosenthal, who had a rat maze experiment. So he split his class into two groups and told one group that their rats were bred to have higher intelligence and do better in these rat mazes, and the other students' rats were normal and appeared to be dull with solving these mazes. But actually the rats were randomly assigned, but the students weren't aware of that. But naturally the group who had the rats that were told to be bred with higher intelligence performed better in the tests, although they weren't any smarter. And then this was further proof of the experimenter expectancy that we talked about with von Osten, saying that your expectations can affect how you perceive events, and there can be observer bias in experiments. So Rosenthal's next experiment, he started questioning if this also affected schools and if teachers' expectancies affected students. So the school he picked was Oak School, which was a middle lower class neighborhood, and he picked 18 teachers, 16 female, 2 male, and then they were through the grades 1 through 6. And then the basis of the experiment was he told teachers a group of students were the most gifted academically based on an IQ test, and then he recorded their IQs at the beginning and end of the school year to see the differences, and then he could tell from there if the teachers were more biased towards the more gifted students. So the method to his experiment, all the students were given a general intelligence test, and this one was the test of general ability. And then the teachers were told that they were also be given a test called the Harvard Test of Inflected Acquisition. And they took the top 20% of scores and gave them to the teachers and told them this was the most gifted group of students. But actually these students were randomly chosen, so they weren't any more gifted or smarter than the other ones. And the students were also tested at the end of the school year, and then the difference between their IQs were calculated, and they could tell that if the gifted group of students had a higher increase in IQ, that the teachers had to be more biased and giving them more attention, so they did better on the IQ test because the students on the gifted group are actually no smarter than the regular students.
All right, so the research question for Rosenthal was, are students affected by teacher expectancies? And the data and measurements that were used were students were given an IQ test at the beginning and end of each school year, and the increase and decrease in IQ is compared between the gifted group and the normal group. If the gifted group had a greater IQ increase, then it can be assumed that the teachers have given bias towards the gifted group people, like Izzy said. So the hypothesis for this experiment is that there's a correlation between